Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Employee Mental Health Crisis, How to Make It Right, being presented by HR Morning and sponsored by Espýr. My name is Ty, and I will be your moderator for this program. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in the control panel. If they're regarding the subject being presented, I'll add them to the queue for questions at the end. Lastly, the materials can be downloaded from the handout section of the control panel. Now I'd like to introduce your speaker, Michelle Cousins.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank Espýr for sponsoring this very important session and for HR Morning for hosting it. As Ty mentioned, my slides are available for download in the handout section of your screen. I do really encourage you to go ahead and do that because this is a topic that you're going to be thinking about well into the future, and you're going to need to have some serious discussions with others on your team. So hopefully you will find that the content that I'm going to go through today is not only useful while I'm going through it, but well afterwards. So I do make my slides very content rich for that purpose. And I'll tell you that just in my own promotion of this event, I have heard from a lot of people who have just sort of volunteered what they've been going through. So I think that probably some of you today are attending this session not only for the benefit of your employees and your role in HR, but also maybe for your own mental health as well. So this crisis really continues to be one of the most difficult challenges that HR is dealing with. And if you think about it, many of us have gotten our own experience and education in the HR field well before this was such a main topic. And so it also might be blindsiding some of us as well. And so the stakes are pretty high here. Mental health issues affect a variety of aspects, whether it's retention, productivity, engagement, and even how much we're spending for our employees on healthcare in general as well. So today I'll provide some tips on how to handle this particular issue itself. And again, let's acknowledge it's a heavy subject. It's a sensitive subject, and many times, it's not just our employees that are dealing with this, but also their family members. In particular, I know I have many friends who have children who are really struggling from a mental health standpoint with everything they've been through as well. So specifically, I'll talk about the true magnitude of this mental health crisis and what that means in terms of the impact on business and even our economy. And then I'll also discuss how we can think about our organizational culture in the context of some of the stigmas that are out there about mental health. And of course, some workplace solutions, things that we can do to address mental health needs. And it is a reminder, though, that many times HR may feel like they have to solve everything themselves, but this is a topic that you do want to make sure that you have good experts involved with, obviously. So let's start off by talking about the true magnitude of this mental health crisis and what that does mean for business today. So there's a real blurring of lines, right, between our work lives and our personal lives. We've seen that working and living in the same place for many of us for so long makes it very difficult to switch gears into, we had routines before that kind of provided some separation and transition throughout our day, and those have kind of evaporated. Also, people are feeling pretty isolated in many cases. So even some of the people that first told me they were so excited about working from home because it sounded so much, quote, easier, they are seeing some of the effects of this isolation, and it might have crept up on them without them fully realizing until it was already manifesting itself. This sort of continuous being on all the time, right? We're accessible 24/7. People send us messages all times of day, and I'm guilty of that myself. I work odd hours, and so I assume everyone else is as well. Just the level of change that we're dealing with, not only that it's enormous, but that it's much more frequent than ever before. and it's in very, very large disruptive elements. The financial strains that we see, where people are seeing that at an individual level, and it seems like, every week, every month, we've got some new source of potential financial strain. So people either are feeling that directly or they're worried about it. They're also worried from a business standpoint because obviously it's affecting businesses. You think about even like the supply chain crisis, that aspect and how it's affecting businesses today. Just some of the concerning economic trends in general, where we're seeing, where our interest rates going to go and what's going to happen with the effects of the supply chain and so on. Just the political polarity that we're experiencing, particularly in the United States, and that does work its way into the workplace these days as well. World events, look, let's just talk about the elephant in the room here for a second, right? We've got the situation in Ukraine. It's not the only world event, but it's certainly occupying a lot of our worry these days. And it's something that I think we feel we need to pay attention to, obviously, but at the same time, the imagery and so on can really cause a lot of additional mental health concerns. Uh, all of these types of things don't just affect us mentally, but what happens is how our mental situation affects our physical health as well. And so it can feed into higher obesity. It can even lower our immune systems reliability. It can affect heart disease. In fact, I just saw, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that Science Daily had a study that came out that did link mental health issues to cardiovascular disease. But even, if someone is going through cancer and then on top of it, maybe they or someone in their family is going through a lot of these stressors and it's affecting their mental health, that then can hinder the progress of the cancer patient as well. We're seeing that, some people had some mental health issues prior to this, whether we knew about them or not. And now everything that we're contending with is actually driving some magnified effects as a result of that. And as I mentioned, it's not just about the employee. You've got to really think more holistically about this. They're part of a family unit, however they define that family unit. And there's also a lot going on with the other people in their families as well. Now, we also have very divisive factors within the work setting today, whether it's online or face to face. And so let me kind of highlight what some of those divisive factors are that we're seeing. We've got just a lot of unevenness about who has to be in the office, when they have to be in the office. Some people that want to be in the office that can't, and some people that don't want to be in the office that have to, and so that causes some additional stress and friction. People have had to shift roles and responsibilities quite a bit, and that continues to be pretty fluid because a lot of businesses are sort of all hands on deck for a variety of reasons. We've got more online communication, and it's great that we have so many good tools to do that, but we're still seeing less of that in-person type of bonding, and we're human animals, and so that starts to wear on people after a while. We are seeing that we can use that technology to communicate, but because it is more instantaneous, more casual, that means that sometimes people aren't being quite as thoughtful about what they write before they write it. I also think that people's fuses are pretty short, even on things like social media. I posted something in a Cubs group yesterday about, hey, they moved the time up to 5:30 in case people didn't see it. And I had some guy that I didn't know, of course, write back and say, yeah, duh, there's been a bunch of postings about this already. Really nasty comments. And I wrote back and I said, gee, I'm really sorry that I that I wrecked your day, kind of thing, right? So everyone's fuses are very short. Clashing of generations, where we've got more generations in the workplace than ever before, and people are in different life cycle stages, both in their personal and professional lives, and there could be some friction over that. People are changing jobs much more frequently, whether it's within the company or between companies. And so that is causing a lot of extra stress in terms of some of the gaps and the transitions, even just in terms of other stressors. You know, we talk about the pandemic a lot, but it's not just the pandemic. People could have ongoing concerns. Maybe they're taking care of aging parents, for instance, and that is just another, you know, stressor on top of everything else. There's been excessive and very diverse sources of stress and uncertainty, and there's a heightened competitiveness right now that companies are competing on their products and services, but also they're competing for their talent as well. There's a lot more social anxiety, and some people kind of feel like they have to almost teach themselves how to socialize again. I was out earlier this week. It was the first time in a long time that I got together with a group of people that weren't my family members. And I have to say, I experienced some of that myself. Just the influence of social media, right? And so I mentioned my little story a minute ago, but in general, you know, social media can be great for a lot of things, but it also can fuel the fires for people's anxieties. Just in general, some places are seeing that their organizational health, their culture, so to speak, has kind of eroded in this process, and that unless that's reinvigorated, there's not sort of the underpinnings of that support as well. In general, when I talk about polarity, of course, we're talking about not just the political type stuff, but social views as well. So these are a lot of things that we're all contending with, and you're probably nodding your head along with some of those yourselves. There's a lot of effects on society from mental illness. It is projected to cost the global economy $16 trillion by 2030, and that's data from the American Heart Association. And there's been a lot of increase, unfortunately, and you probably see this like if you watch the nightly news or you're reading any of the, you know, newspapers and so on. Huge increases in suicide rates. In fact, even before the pandemic, this was already a concern. There was a 35% increase in suicide rates between 1998 and 2018. And then between 2000, if you bracket that year up through 2020, the annual rate increased by 30%. And the predictions are that when they do size up the data, 2021, 2022, we're seeing even higher projections. You can see a graph there that kind of shows you, some of what we're seeing there. 25% of Americans suffer from some sort of mental or substance abuse, in which, by the way, many times those go hand in hand, because substance abuse is often sort of a panacea, a way of handling mental illness, a very bad way, of course, but that's data from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. About 18% of Americans do experience an anxiety disorder each year. Think about that. That's a lot of people, right? Every year. 70% of professionals have experienced more stress and more anxiety at work this past year than in any other year that they have been working. And that's data from Oracle. So again, this is not just sort of a interesting topic. This is crucial to not only the survival of your business, but the future of your business as well. I mentioned that addiction and substance abuse kind of go hand in hand with some of the mental illness concerns. CNBC had come out and said, listen, drug and alcohol addiction in the workplace has really increased. And of course, we've heard a lot about the opioid crisis. More than 40 states have seen a rise in the opioid-related deaths. There's ongoing concerns, again, around this. We're seeing that facilities are saying that they're seeing as much as a 30% increase in facility occupancy due to addiction and abuse since the pandemic began. And it's in a variety of different types of jobs. In fact, they're even seeing a significant increase in executives in the C-level, the C-suite jobs. Why? Well, again, routines have been disrupted. People had spent a long time managing not only their work, but their children's schoolwork. A lot of the services that were available to them previously, maybe through an employer or through other means, those got disrupted as a result of what those agencies were going through themselves during the pandemic. And again, those isolation and family and health worries. As far as your business, there's a lot of impacts of this from a real tangible standpoint. Kaiser Permanente has said that mental health conditions are associated with the prevalence, the progression, the outcome of a lot of physical conditions. Employees who haven't really had their mental health conditions addressed tend to have a lot more serious and more expensive health issues. They gave some examples I was reading that said that the risk for heart attacks and strokes is twice as high for people who are experiencing mental illness. And of course, if you think about it, cardiovascular disease is America's most costly and prevalent chronic condition. People with severe mental health, they go on to say, are twice as likely to develop type 2 diabetes. And that also adds a lot of spend per employee each year in medical costs, as well as in lost productivity. So looking at the slide there, you can see it affects the productivity, certainly. It also impairs people's focus and their ability to make decisions. It can affect their memory function. And I know even just from having had COVID a few months ago, I feel like occasionally my memory, gets very fuzzy, but also mental health issues certainly can bring that on as well. Increased apprehension of the future, of what's going to happen next, and then also decreased comprehension as a result of it. So it's harder for people to take in information maybe as quickly as they would have otherwise. It certainly hinders collaboration and teamwork. People are going to be more irritable. Their emotions are going to be on alert. And so you're going to see that manifest in maybe inappropriate ways in the workplace. And then, of course, that affects whether the team's actually getting the work done. Worker burnout. So people are just exhausted, right? I mean, if they aren't taking the time to address these issues and even just decompress periodically, you're seeing mental exhaustion, but also physical exhaustion and general emotional exhaustion. The healthcare spend is up, and you're going to see that I think insurance companies are going to continue to be addressing the increased costs that they're seeing on their end from some of the support that they're providing through healthcare providers that are busier than ever, providing some of these services to people, and just employee churn, right? So people working today are looking to their companies for support. And because we're in a very competitive job market, if we're not providing them with some mechanism for that support, then they're going to look at that very closely when they're considering other job offers as well. Last but not least, of course, it has a direct effect on things like absenteeism. If people need to take a mental health day, and I think probably all of us along the way, have used that phrase, I'm going to take a mental health day. You're going to see more and more of that, and ultimately people are going to be less reliable. So you see a box there that talks about by combining medical and behavioral healthcare services, the United States could save between 37 and 67 billion dollars per year, and that's data per the CDC. Now, talking about the signs and the signals of stress and anxiety, what are the signs? Well, again, this idea that people can't shut it off. Work is always looming over them. Devices are always dinging and startling them if they are actually off the clock, right? Just the disturbed sleep. I know my own sleep patterns have not been as good, and I can always feel it, even if I don't know exactly why I'm feeling the stress and anxiety and I'm unable to sleep the next day. I think about it and I pretty much know. It's just a lack of pleasure in some of the non-work activities, that we're not able to actually enjoy the other typically enjoyable parts of our hobbies and our interests. Just general difficulty concentrating, people getting angry quickly, having a lack of energy as well. Maybe people are finding they are needing more sleep than ever before because it's the body's way of saying that it's just shutting down to some extent. Not having consistent procedures. So if people are switching gears a lot, I told you we've got a lot of fluidity in terms of people's roles and responsibilities. And so that means then they don't have any sense of continuity. Maybe they have too much to do, or they have a high need to achieve, or maybe they're struggling because their organization is changing so very much. So what are some of the signals? Well, obviously, you're going to see it show up in your turnover numbers. You're going to see it in your absentee rates. You're also going to see it maybe in some of the worker complaints, and that could be through some of the hotline mechanisms, or people going to their managers and bickering with each other, or coming to HR with formal complaints, all of those types of things. And that means HR is spending more time intervening in all of those situations, which, first of all, I know you don't have a shortage of work to do, right? And also, this is an area that tends to be delicate ground when you're dealing with some of these confrontations. We are seeing, of course, that some organizations have EAP programs, employee assistance programs, and the usage rates are much higher than typically in the past. But even changes in revenue and profitability can certainly be indicators of what people's mental health situation is doing to the business. You can also gauge things through employee engagement surveys, looking at focus groups, talking to people, about their experiences, maybe even doing one-on-one interviews because it is a fairly sensitive subject, and then even measuring yourselves against industry standards. And so looking at what other companies are doing in this regard and how they're handling these situations. So there's a lot of stigma around the phrase mental health, right? If you talk to our grandparents' generation, it has a very different feel for how people describe it than maybe what we're all seeing today. So firstly, you got to ask yourself, are you creating a truly inclusive environment for people in your work settings in the first place? What do we mean when we talk about inclusion? I know you probably take tons of training on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but when we really get down to what inclusion is, here's a quote I like: promoting the full participation of all workforce members and ensuring a sense of belonging for them. And that's a quote by a gentleman, last name Hertz. He's at the National Institutes for Safety Standards Standards and Technology, National Institute for Standards and Technology. And you can click on the link and get his full article. But what I really want to heighten here is that sense of belonging, because it means that you feel respected and valued for who you are, that you're not expected to be perfect, that people take the time to get to know each employee and that they care about them, that there's a feeling of supportive energy and commitment from other people. And so that does mean that people are talking about what? Their lives, right? And they got to feel comfortable talking about how they're feeling about their lives as well. So if you look at this slide, you can see there on the right-hand side, there's a caption there that says mental health is a workforce health issue. And you can see that untreated depression costs almost $9,500 per employee per year on average. So it's not every employee, obviously, but on average. And that is the cost in absenteeism and lost productivity. So again, can you afford to just ignore this issue? Probably not. It's the single greatest cause of worker disability. So think about that. Whether you are subsidizing disability plans for your employees or whether they're paying for them themselves, they're missing work. right? And so it's not just whether you're funding their pay while they're out on disability, it's that work isn't getting done. And guess what? Not only is the work not getting done, but other people are having to cover for them when they're out. Guess what? Now you're overburdening the other people, and I don't think that's helping their mental health too much either. So according to Kaiser Permanente, about 75% of employees have struggled with an issue that affected their mental health. But at the same time, 8 out of 10 workers with a mental health condition say that, feelings of shame and the stigma that comes with it actually keep them from seeking mental health care. They might fear that they'll be outed and people will find out about it, or they worry about their medical records, and it's indicated that maybe submitting it through their insurance is going to make them more visible about it. And employees with untreated mental health conditions tend to use other healthcare services. So in other words, if they don't seek out the mental health services, instead it starts to manifest itself in these other physical types of ways, and now they're at the doctor for some of those physical things as well. And Kaiser says up to 3 times more frequently than those who actually get the mental health treatment. So 62%, they say, of missed work days can be attributed to mental health conditions. That is significant. Not only that, but depressed employees, they are 20 to 40% more likely to become unemployed because of their condition. So in other words, if it isn't addressed, it gradually then prohibits them from being able to be functional in their jobs. And in many cases, they end up losing their jobs. So look at what the stigma is here. It's being judged, it's being made to feel that you're less than worthy, or less than what you should be. People have fears that they're going to lose their jobs if people find out that they are struggling, or maybe they won't get promotions as a result of it. They may feel alienated from their coworkers. That there's a phenomenon I talk about a lot when I teach my diversity and inclusion courses, around when someone identifies any kind of condition, whether it's mental health or other sorts of disabilities. Unfortunately, because people themselves don't know how to handle that, and no one's talked to them about how to handle that information, they stay away from the person because they don't want to risk saying the wrong thing, or it just generally makes them uncomfortable, or they have that outdated view of mental health, as I list there, the historical view that, oh, they're crazy. Oh, I don't want to be around them. Boy, that's a crazy person, right? So there's a lot of reasons why people are not seeking out the care that they really need. There's a lot of reasons for anxiety in the workplace. And what is anxiety? Anxiety is feeling out of control. And look at all the different reasons, coworker conflicts. We've got shorter deadlines than ever before. Maybe you're managing other people and you're taking on all of their stress. And, I know from managing myself, that's a burden that you carry with you at the end of the day. You can't just shut it off. Just the working hours, whether it's just, the types of hours people are working, the total number of work hours, maybe that's up significantly to try to catch up on things that have to get done. Maybe it's just how they're feeling treated by their boss. They might feel like, just in general, they have too much to do. I mean, we all have, I think, too much on our plates right now. Maybe they feel like they're not getting significant guidance from their management on what to do, and that's causing stress. It could be inequity, perceived inequity maybe, or real, that they see in their workplace. Just a general lack or loss of control over how they do their work or what to do next. And certainly things like pay rates can even be a stressor for people. So, why don't people talk about all this anxiety? Well, according to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, 72% of Americans say that workplace stress and anxiety interferes with their lives. Again, 72%. So breaking that down into some subcategories here, you can see 34% fear being seen as uncooperative if they talk about any of their fears and anxieties. 31% fear that they're going to be seen as weak. 22% fear that it can affect those promotion opportunities. 22% also think that these notes would be put in their file and held against them well into the future of their careers. And 20% actually fear that people are going to make fun of them, or they're just going to kind of lock them out of things. So we have to think about what those inclusive strategies are that we can employ. First off, we want to try to be accommodating. I know that traditionally when we use the word accommodation in an HR context, we think of it in terms of protected classes and compliance requirements that we have to follow. But I encourage you to broaden that definition. It's not about dictating every way that people have to work and how they structure their day. And you may have to work with your managers on this, because if they're very hands-on managers, they need to maybe be educated a little bit on how to change their styles, because people should be evaluated based on results. And if there are things that we can do to help them to better cope with the stresses they're feeling and still get the results we need, why not do it? Encourage patience and empathy. Ironically, we're more connected on things like social media than ever before, but that sense of empathy is actually lacking. And so I think part of it too is people are so wound up in their own issues and trying to just get through the day themselves. They feel spent. They feel like they don't have the leftover tank to help other people or to just be a lending ear for people. Asking managers and team leaders to check in on their employees. Now, by the way, check in is a very different thing than check up on, right? Check up on is just going to cause more stress. We're talking about authentically checking in with people. How you doing? How you feeling? You know, boy, acknowledge, you know, we're going through a tough time here, and I just want you to know that I know that and I understand it. It doesn't mean the managers can wave a magic wand and make it all go away, but I do think that sometimes acknowledging the situation can actually in and of itself be helpful. Incorporate mental wellness and the associated supports as part of being committed to your employees, and I'll talk more about some of those mechanisms in a little bit here, but also as part of your employer brand itself. So I know you have a product and service type of brand associated with your companies, but we also want to think about your employer brand. How do you want to be known as an employer? And we do whole sessions on employer branding, but part of that, again, is are you known as an employer that genuinely cares about the employees, and fostering mental wellness can be a part of that. Building awareness of whatever mechanisms you have that are available. So you might have some things in place. The question is, do employees actually know about them? Do they realize how easy it may be to connect with those resources? So reiterating that, reinforcing it over time. Allow people to show their vulnerability. I think that's just a really, really important point. So I want to highlight it a little further here. People tend to think that if they make themselves vulnerable, that's a sign of weakness. And it's actually the opposite. Showing vulnerability can allow people to bond to each other. And guess what? It starts at the top. And I mentioned earlier that we are seeing executives facing these mental health issues, of course, as well. You know, leadership should acknowledge some of their own concerns that they've been grappling with, their own struggles, because that allows employees to see that they're human. Having a zero tolerance for biased behavior is also really important. And that's true in terms of bias in general, but certainly in relationship to mental health. So, you know, you can't let people joke about this kind of thing, because even what is deemed as the most innocent joke to kind of break things up, if it's around mental health, oh, he's so crazy. You know, don't mind Michelle, she's just being bipolar today. Those kind of comments are very hurtful, and they stay with people and they divide people, and they just frankly should not be tolerated. When I say them out loud, they are so offensive. And then also conducting mental health seminars. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you in HR are doing that on your own, but obviously connecting with the experts that can facilitate that sort of seminar to your employees. You do want to cultivate positive, engaging behaviors. This is not to say that, oh, okay, we're going to try to encourage these behaviors and problem solved, right? So please know that I am not minimizing that, it's similar to if someone tells a friend that they're depressed and then their friend is like, come on, cheer up, right? We're not talking about that here. But we are saying is that there are some structural behaviors that we can try to encourage that may dissuade some of the triggers that can aggravate mental health issues. So things like making sure that we are providing the abilities and the tools for people to collaborate, and that we're teaching them new ways to collaborate, that we're talking about curiosity and creativity and ways to bring that out in people so they are vibrant in that regard, and that can spark a sense of optimism and even perseverance, a sense of grit. Certainly traits like discipline and reliability are really important, and how are we cultivating those behaviors in a reasonable manner. Communication, obviously hugely important in general, but are we communicating maybe more than we would have in the past so that people, especially those working remotely, feel that sense of connection? Time management itself, people need some help with that. They may have had some good strategies in place when they had a more routine kind of day, but some people, if that structure is sort of taken away, they flail and they need to have some help with how to do that. Just general proactivity. Do people know that they can speak up about things? And are you fostering that sense of, initiating concerns? Having a good sense of emotional intelligence. And I know that that's a soft skill that companies may have said, yeah, we'll invest in that, as a nice to have. Truly emotional intelligence is imperative in today's work environment. And along with that, respect for differences and for dissent, that people aren't attacking each other, and that they not only respect differences, but they value them. And then, of course, just instilling an interest in trying new things so that people are able to then embrace change a little bit. And so this also contends with a concept called resilience. And so if you want to learn more about that, there's a great resource there that I include on the bottom of the slide. So when we talk about specific workplace solutions to help us address this mental health crisis, again, saying things like, okay, well, let's all try to cheer up. Let's all try to make the best of things. I mean, those types of little anecdotes that I hear people say, I don't know about you, but it really kind of does the opposite. It's sort of like when someone says, calm down. It's the first thing that gets me worked up, right? So we have to be careful about the signals that we send, and we have to go beyond the rhetoric and actually invest in mental health benefits. And what are the types of benefits that we should be looking at? Support mechanisms, things that are going to connect the employee to professionals so that they can get the counseling, the coaching, the consulting that they really need. Engagement, where you're going to see that, yes, you might have one of those traditional employee assistance programs, but having focused expertise that actually goes beyond and is more concentrated on these particular issues of mental health. Providing access to care. So do you have access to a network of providers in the first place, healthcare providers and otherwise? And then a lot of guidance that can be provided. So, I was talking to someone yesterday about how when companies go through financially challenging times, there's two areas that they tend to cut. They tend to cut marketing, and they tend to cut training and development. And you can't afford to do that. First of all, you won't keep your employees because they're wanting it anyway. But around this topic of mental health, there's a lot of training and guidance that should be provided here. Training around resiliency in and of itself is just hugely important for your business in general, but also just in terms of how you're approaching your management training. Deloitte had a study that said that only 22% of managers had received some form of mental health training, even though many of them actually felt responsible for their staff members' mental well-being, right? So you gotta equip your managers, because otherwise they're not going to know what to do, and they're going to feel blindsided as well. Incorporating the topic of mental health into your diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility training, as well as the associated accommodations and the expectations that you have, whether that's in your HR manuals or other directives. And then even things like employee assessments that can be made available, and even giving advice on healthy lifestyles, again, beyond the workplace interactions. Consider the degree of mental health coverage that you also have in your medical plans that employees have access to, or maybe even related supplemental plans as well. Make sure they understand what coverage is included in there. Sometimes they have coverage they don't realize they have, or they're afraid of the cost, and maybe they don't fully understand that it is much more accessible and not as cost prohibitive as it used to be. Treatment and care does work. For example, here from the Mental Health Mental Health America, it works. It actually really works for more than 8 in 10 people. That's a huge success rate, 80%, right? 80% plus, who get help for depression, and more than 90%, 9 in 10 people who get help for things like panic attacks. So there is help that actually works out there. Now, here are some general protocols to employ. You do want to make sure that you are communicating this supportive demeanor about mental illness, and do that proactively. Don't just wait until people come to you. You want to train your managers and supervisors so they really do understand what these early indicators are, so that hopefully they can help people early in the process, not only because it's beneficial for all the reasons I mentioned for your business, but out of a genuine, humane caring for the individual, so it doesn't get so far manifested. And then promoting those wellness programs more effectively. Also enact wellness incentives so that you're actually rewarding employees for making positive lifestyle changes. And so, again, there are things that you can do that can actually make people want to make some of these changes. And then also, actually I have that twice. It was so important, right? And then provide health coaching and counseling. And again, that's not necessarily you personally that's doing that, but facilitating those mechanisms to provide those forms of assistance. And by the way, as I talk through what some of those are, you'll see also a reminder that these are much more accessible even to small businesses today. So you want to acknowledge that the workflow and the deadlines and all of these things that we're contending with can really lead to a lot of burnout, right? People talk about stress, and there's actually 2 kinds of stress. So when we think about these emotional and physiological manifestations, they can sometimes actually have some positives. If we don't have a certain amount of momentum, right? If somebody just tells you, yeah, get it done whenever you have time, or get it done whenever you want, which I don't think people say too often, but then we don't feel that adequate amount of pressure to move forward on something. And so that diagram there is to reinforce the idea that there's a tipping point. If we have too little momentum and pressure, we're bored with our jobs. That may cause people to look for other jobs as well, but we're also not productive. And so we want to kind of push people, but we don't want to push them to the point where now they've crossed that tipping point and it's too much stress. I've noticed it at times where I'm under so much stress with so many deadlines, so many different things to do, it kind of paralyzes me. And again, I get that fogginess in my brain, and I literally can't think about what to do first because I'm so overwhelmed by the work. That's what we're talking about here in terms of stress. So again, it's not the eustress, it's the distress. And 83% of Americans experience work-related stress. And in turn, what the American Institute of Stress says is that work-related stress costs the companies billions of dollars and a lot of hours of lost productivity. So we have to find ways to foster resilience and optimism. And again, this isn't about waving a magic wand and just making the topic of mental illness completely disappear, but you can create a framework for optimism. Acknowledge again the apprehension, the vulnerability, communicate frequently and transparently, remove obstacles for people. I think that's a big part of being any kind of manager. And so if you are providing some training and development for your managers, think about what are they doing to actually remove obstacles for their employees and helping them to actually make decisions. You want to achieve and celebrate quick wins. I've always said that, but that's more important now than ever before. People need to be acknowledged and they need to understand the value in short time intervals. Institutionalize any learnings while you're continuing to evolve. So as you're learning about how people work and what seems to be working for them, how are you opening that up to other employees that may benefit from how that work style has worked out for them? Have open-minded discussions without personal judgment. And again, that's something that I talk about in general in terms of having an inclusive environment, but certainly that is going to help with the mental health issues as well. And you want to avoid blaming people who are taking a lot of risks with doing work they've never done before and making decisions about issues they've never confronted before either. So here are some ways that people can cope, and you may find this helpful for yourselves as well, of course. Obviously, things like exercise, diet, sleep, lifestyle, even meditation and mindfulness. I'm seeing a lot of companies that are actually instituting training sessions around meditation or providing times blocked on people's calendars to just kind of shut down and meditate. That kind of is a nice proactive prompt for them that gives them permission, by the way, to stop the frenzy of work for a little while. So giving people sufficient rest periods, encouraging people to take their time that they've accrued to take time off, whether they're going to take it to travel or just to kind of be off email for a certain time period. Invoke humor. Obviously, be careful about the type of humor that you're using. Maybe it's, taking a class. It could be a class for work. It could be a class for fun. Having weekly meetups online, so a lot of people are still working remotely, obviously, or in person, depending on the circumstances. Ways that people can just kind of connect, maybe bring in a video for people that's just fun to watch that has nothing to do with work, or, things that can connect people. Encourage people to get outside. Look, I know it sounds cliche, but it's actually really true. It can help people clear their heads, but it also is a change of scenery, and even the sunshine can help. So having people do a walk and work, where maybe one-on-one meetings, people are walking around a little bit instead of sitting in an office. Having exercise breaks during the day that are sponsored by the company, and even creating work-life boundaries where you say, you know what, we're going to ask that we have some no work hours. Now what you've done again is you are setting the stage that it's a priority for people to be able to have some time away from work. And then of course, just for ourselves, thinking about how we structure our day, the more that I pre-plan the night before, the less anxiety I have the following day. Organizationally, we can think about strengthening our people networks. And so whether that's through general communication, but also maybe even establishing different networking opportunities, both within the company and outside, having office hour forums where people can come together and they know that their management has time blocked on the calendar for this, and whether they just want to chit chat or they have particular issues they want to raise, that time is reserved. They know when it is, and it's available to them. And then facilitating access to learning opportunities, whether that's in person or online, is going to allow people to feel that, okay, there's something positive, that, I'm still a learning human being and I'm still able to feed that. Having live feeds to any of your meetings. So, this really goes to especially the people who might feel kind of isolated if they're working from home, especially if other people are in the office. So anytime that you're having any meetings, make sure that you've got those live feeds available. Also, some companies have even just started to have cameras in their hallways and in general areas, cafeterias, and that kind of thing. So anyone who is logging on can kind of see, the environment, feel like they're part of the environment, and then providing those external resources for assistance. So let's talk about those outside resources. Outside resources can really help in resolving some of these personal issues that may be interfering with work performance. Even back in 2019, SHRM, the Society of HR Managers, they had an employee benefits research report that said 79% of employers that they surveyed did offer an employee assistance program or some other external support mechanism. And that's good news, but you've got to make sure that the right safeguards are in place in terms of things like, confidentiality and those sorts of elements. But the EAPs are not the only options. And when we're thinking about mental health, they may not go far enough. So employees have to have access in a variety of ways. For instance, they might have access to the counseling through your health plans, but they may not realize it. Make sure they know. Additionally, you may have an employee relations person or area within the HR function itself, and so that can also be of some assistance. Maybe there are employee networking groups as well. But some of those traditional resources, as I was mentioning, the employee assistance programs, those can be great for a variety of situations, but in terms of mental health, many of those programs are so spread thin across a whole slew, a myriad of issues. They're not necessarily focused specifically on mental health. And because you do need experts with this, you may want to think about either revamping your EAP by having seminars on, specific topics related to mental health, maybe things around stress management or other types of health vendors coming in and talking. Or you want to think about supplementing your EAP with something that is distinctly related to mental health in the first place. Ways that you can provide counseling and coaching connections to them, and other means of support groups as well. And technology can be a huge help here. And that's, we've seen the proliferation of technology in general during the pandemic, but there are some ways that technology can in particular help the mental health crisis. So 83% of employees do want their company to provide technological supports for their mental health. That's pretty high, right? And it might surprise some of you actually, that people are actually saying they're very comfortable with using technology to help manage their mental health issues. 80% of people would prefer to talk to a robot, something like an artificial intelligence powered therapist or a chatbot counselor, instead of their manager about the stress and anxiety at work. Again, the technology has evolved to the point where it feels very human, but also they want something outside, right? So those sources come from Oracle and Workplace Intelligence. The digital cognitive-based therapy, so that's abbreviated CBT, those options can actually provide another inclusive layer to help people in changing their actual behaviors and their thinking patterns. And so there can be an elevated immediacy to accessing that, sort of in a just-in-time basis. I mean, listen, you can't say, it's not like I'm going to schedule a cleaning at the dentist and I can wait 2 months, right? When someone's going through some mental health issues, they need immediate access. So it has to be convenient and it has to be immediately accessible, helping to focus on not only the skills they need for now, but maybe even helping them to anticipate coping skills for the future. So keep in mind that someone might, so to speak, feel mentally healthy now. That doesn't mean that they might be thrown a curveball and they might actually have mental health issues in the future, right? And then superior security and confidentiality is really important, obviously, in all of this. Now, there are some compliance considerations as well. So if an employee discloses a mental illness, be very careful on this as HR, right? And you got to remind management of this as well. You got to respect their right to privacy. The employer also has to be careful to adhere to reasonable accommodation requirements under the Americans with Disability Act. Now, the caveat with that is, of course, if it represents what they call an undue hardship to the business. But, it's a pretty wide path before they will actually say there was an undue hardship. So it might mean things like, what equipment or modifications are being provided to the person, their schedule, their responsibilities, and so on. Now you might say, well, what's the difference between the ADA and the ADAA? And actually there could be a third A there. So there's the Americans with Disabilities Act that was originally created, and then there was the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendment Act. And that actually goes a little bit further. In that regard, when they updated that, they said that disability has to be broadly defined to actually include more people, and looking at whether or not there was any discriminatory aspects to that. So the amendment, when it was enacted, says that any impairment that substantially limits a major life activity doesn't necessarily have to limit other major life activities in order to be considered a disability. So in other words, there's a broader definition of who would qualify under these acts in terms of their job responsibilities. You do want to document and follow your own policies. I mean, it seems like good advice anyway, right? But in terms of people's personal information, remember, they fear the stigmas associated with this. So are you classifying their information and protecting it? Are you making sure that you're careful who has access to that information? Are you segmenting your personnel data from other company data and storing any medical related information separately from the employee's personnel file? Now, if you're working with vendors either on the mental health issue itself, and again, the accessibility is there for even the smallest of companies today, or if you're looking at vendors for even some assistance on just some of the data elements of this, you have to ask yourself some questions here to make sure that you're making good decisions on these vendors. Do they meet the needs of your organization and your employees? Are they providing that sensitivity and confidentiality that you need in protecting data? Do they have actual evidence that the work they've done with employees has led to some company savings in various ways? Are they able to accommodate you as an organization as you continue to change? And then you can see a list of vendor considerations there. So I encourage you to always check out individual vendors. Obviously they should have good technology themselves and be accessible, but they should have a good track record and be able to share what the successes have been, particularly with other companies like yours. And you want to look at how long the vendor has been in business as well. So last thing I'll mention here is stay up on best practices. That's smart advice in general, but in relation to mental health in particular, I list some specific resources there for you. So in addition to a lot of the events and conferences and things that you go to, make sure that you are checking out places like HR Morning, which has a lot of great resources through their website that you can sign up for, the Society of HR Managers, but also the Center for Workplace Mental Health America, certainly the CDC, and then even McKinsey Health Institute. Keep your eyes and ears open for your own benefit as well as for the benefit of your own employees. I do want to share my contact information. You have it there in your slides that you can download. If you want to stay in touch with me, you want to reach out to me with any questions that you have, maybe about particular issues that you're facing with your employees, I'll be more than happy to stay in touch with you. So with that, Ty, I'll turn it back over to you to close us out.
Thank you, Michelle. And in order to remain on schedule, we will respond to the questions that came in by chat via email in a timely manner. So with that, on behalf of HR Morning, I would also like to thank everyone for attending the webinar. This concludes our program.